on this episode of the Passionate Homeschooler Podcast.
Relentless optimism is a revolutionary act because it runs so counter to the culture as we have it at present. But to also be able to portray that image from an adult perspective, that's the revolutionary part, right? That you could be a fully functioning human being with no deficiencies and still see the world this way. That is the part that is revolutionary.
Here at the Passionate Homeschooler, Deanna and I have become fanatics for the new Apple TV Plus show, Ted Lasso, starring Jason Sudeikis. Now, what, you might wonder, does that have to do with homeschooling? We brought our friend, high school teacher Luc Travers, back on the show to talk about an unusual story genre that he identified in literature, the optimistic outsider who wins over a cynical world, which we hope will give you some ideas on what you might be able to offer to your student. In this episode, we talk about what Ted Lasso shares with classic literature like Jane Eyre and Anne of Green Gables, and also the way in which it's different, even revolutionary. Another thing that's revolutionary is the Literature Plus curriculum from the Pisan Academy, which gives you everything you need to teach the greatest works of literature to your middle and high school students. Works like Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen are supplemented by historical readings to add context, allow your student to connect the dots, and really make these works come alive. Take a look at a free trial available at pisanacademy.com/free, or check out the link in the show notes. Here's the discussion.
So we have Luc and Deanna here on the show today. And I'm going to start off just by asking, what is Ted Lasso? So Luc, I'll present that question to you.
All right. So, okay, I'll try to do it in 6 words. And then Deanna, you can see you can fill in some gaps. Okay. Ted Lasso is an optimistic American football coach who decides to apply his coaching abilities to an entirely different sport and an entirely different culture.
Right. And when Luc says American football, he means the kind that's played with a leather oblong egg-shaped football.
Yeah. I could detect you're a total sports fan there, Joel.
Yeah. And right. So this is based on a character that the lead actor and head writer of the show, Jason Sudeikis, former Saturday Night Live alumnus, a character that he created, about 7 years ago, thereabouts, maybe 6 years ago, as part of a promotional effort by NBC Sports to introduce the beautiful game, the non-American
Are you going to describe soccer to us now?
Yeah, right. We're all fans here of the beautiful game, but
I guess in Seattle, yeah, there's a lot of Seattle Sounders, and there's a soccer culture there.
Yeah,
oh, sure.
I played soccer when I was young, so I've been, kind of involved in some way or a fan.
Well, high five. I did too.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a different culture about it, although there's a lot of the mania, the fanaticism, which is where the word fan comes from, that is common to both kinds of soccer. But anyway, this is a show that was created by Jason Sudeikis based on this character that he created as sort of a bumbling, ignorant American football coach who is somehow hired by one of the top teams in the top level of
the Premier League.
Yeah. And it was a short-lived character, because how far can you take that kind of a character? It's definitely a fish out of water story, but there's not much you can do with it beyond that. And when you hear that character is resurrected for a multi-episode situation comedy, you might be a little skeptical that they could do anything with it. And it turns out that it is not just hilarious, but heartfelt and sweet and optimistic. It's, the reason that I wanted to have you on the show, Luke, is because on social media, you've just been banging the gong for this show. You love it to pieces.
More than any show in my entire life. I had a dalliance
That's
with the show
big
called
news, yeah.
the Samurai Gourmet, and this one I personally love more than any other show. Even my previous top favorites were Parks and Rec and Seinfeld, and this one, for me personally, it's there's a lot that matches up with what's going on and goes on in my life and who I am. But I also think, like you're describing, that there is something heartfelt and really hilarious and really meaningful that this show can capture that goes beyond lovers of soccer, or those who would describe football as a sport with a leather oblong object.
Yeah. Now, what we have here that's in common with the 2014 version of Ted Lasso is an American football coach who is somehow transplanted to the top levels of the sport in England, and is now tasked with coaching a middle of the road Premier League team with no knowledge of how the sport works on a tactical level, and even on a training level. But what is different from the original character is that he's not completely stupid. He has gifts.
So far from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He has this kind of Zen-like wisdom that transcends technical knowledge, and it's not apparent at first. And this is, I wanted to bring this up. So Bill Lawrence is one of the show co-creators, and he also created Scrubs, that great American sitcom from quite a while ago. And he said that Jason Sudeikis talks about being recognized to this day in Europe, when he travels in Europe, for that bumbling American coach. And he wanted to make, in developing the show, he wanted to make sure that that everyone had expectations of that same character, but he wanted to deliver a twist by turning it into something optimistic.
No, that's fantastic, because right from the very outset, the very first scene of the very first episode of the show is this British kid comes up to him and says, "Are you that football coach? What a joke this is! You're going to completely fail." And the main reporter guy, Trent Grimm, who says, I'm not going to swear, but to say use his exact words, but his first question is this an effing joke that you're here? And I think that it's interesting to hear that was kind of the desired expectation that audiences might have with this, because the show seems to place that question before you as an audience. And it did me, because I'm thinking, can I buy into this? Is this just so just stupid of an idea that it's cartoonish?
Right.
It cannot be realistic.
Had you seen that bumbling American football coach character? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So when I first saw the preview, I was hearkened back to that movie from also long ago, Major League. And I thought it was going to be kind of like that, where it would just be kind of a slapstick comedy. But this show has more heart than any program I've seen in ages, in eons. And I was so happily surprised.
No, that's a great comparison to Major League, because it's like it's a kind of low down team, and the owner of the team is trying to subvert the team themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that adds a little bit of realism to why Ted Lasso is being hired, because he's going to, this is a stupid idea and it's going to sabotage, and she's going to be able to get back at her ex-husband who ditched her for all these pretty blondes. And so now that gives a little bit of credence or realism, but that doesn't touch at all of what, for me, gives this show, like, I believe it. I think it can really happen. If there was a real Ted Lasso who is going over to Barcelona and trying to get Lionel Messi back in the team right now, or the big news today is Lionel Messi is wants to get out of Barcelona. And I would buy into his approach, his methods, his tactics, his everything about him. I'd see it as realistic.
I kind of want to do a Ted Lasso hashtag for Barcelona now. I mean, that's something that I would pay to see. But no, I mean, you mentioned Major League though, as a movie and a plot kind of structure, and it actually does follow that template. But here's the genius behind it, all right? Because in the old Major League movie, the new owner of the team is intentionally sabotaging their chances by getting the worst group of players with the worst manager so that they can get out of their contract and move to a new stadium.
Right.
So that character, the owner character's character is pure evil. There's no kind of redemption. There's no goodness that you can reach in that character. But what's so genius and unusual about the Ted Lasso version of this character is that you can sympathize with this character because she's
with the
hurt.
owner, the team owner, the woman. Yeah,
she's
absolutely.
had something unjust happen to her, so she's lashing out with an emotional rage. And who among us can't relate to that? But it makes the conflict between the characters much more elevated. It's a different kind of conflict. And I think, Luke, you and I might have talked about this in the past, but, you can have a great conflict with good versus evil, but having a conflict with good versus better is an elevating kind of conflict.
Absolutely. One thing is interesting is Ted Lasso's optimism. And when we're recording this, we're only 4 episodes in, so we haven't seen the whole thing yet. But you can see that he's slowly breaking her down, and I don't know if it's through the biscuits or himself, but it's really, really sweet to see, and she's becoming more human as we get to know her. Instead of this, she's not as driven by her rage, but we're learning that she is she's a good person.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned those biscuits, because I think that scene, I'll describe it a little bit, indicates how purposeful this character is in his benevolent view of people. He's not
Absolutely.
going and seeing this wicked, evil person. Well, he doesn't know right now, which is great for the whole overall tension of the story, that she's hired him under these false pretenses. But he approaches each and every single person that he encounters, from the prima donna football player to the raging, angry has-been, and
to the reporter.
To the reporter.
The cynical reporter.
Exactly. Approaches each of them with the desire to connect with them as a human being. And you mentioned this biscuits there, and there's one little brief moment. He brings her biscuits to have biscuits with the boss in the morning to create team building, even with the front office. We got to do that too. And she has no time for it. But then when she has that first biscuit, is like, she yells out an expletive of desire, and she sends her lackey out to try to find it, and he can't find the biscuit shop anywhere. And a little bit later in that episode, he brings over kind of this pack of stuff that is from his son, who sent them all this home stuff, including this barbecue sauce. And he tastes a little bit, and he asks her point blank, "Is there any kind of food that you have that kind of makes you think of home?" And he notices her stare down at the cookies.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit later on in the episode, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, so if you want to fast forward 15 seconds here for this delightful little spoiler. So it's revealed that he bakes them himself.
Yes.
And so whether or not, maybe he baked them knowing that this is a kind of cookie that she enjoyed as a childhood, because he did his research, because it seems like something he would do. I mean, he got the childhood goodies for the Nigerian football player who's out of his country and lonely, and for his birthday, and got him something from back home. Maybe he did that purposely, or at least he's noticing how his actions affect others and how he's connecting to others that way. He's so aware. There's another feel-good story that I think of maybe the most recent one that's kind of really into popular culture, of like an outsider coming in and bringing wonder and beauty and hope to everybody. And that's a Christmas Story, Elf.
Oh,
with
I
Will
love
Ferrell.
Elf.
That's
Oh
on
my
our list.
gosh.
That's
It
on
is
our
one of
list.
my.
Yeah.
I love that movie so much
Yeah,
for that reason. It is
exactly.
it's gorgeous for the goodness that's there.
The goodness that's there. And then there's something there. They both have this unself-conscious positivity about them.
Mhm.
But one thing that's different with Ted Lasso is he is fully aware of what he's doing, and he's out on a mission. Elf is just there kind of drinking his 2-liter of Coke and just
With all the
enjoying
sugar.
all the sugar and
The maple syrup on spaghetti.
and then just watching the girls sing in the shower like
Right.
unabashedly. But it's not, it's kind of, you're just surrounded by him and you're infected by his enthusiasm and his positivity, but he's not trying to
No.
practice leadership.
Right. Right.
And
And you're right. Everything that Ted Lasso does is intentional, and he's aware of how to bring out the best person for each person, I guess.
Oh yeah.
And I
Deanna, do you
wanna
remember this? Sorry, Joel. I want to
Okay.
because Deanna, this is what we're both literature teachers, and this is a great literature moment when he gave each of them a book.
I swooned. I did. I was like, and they're shaking it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, are they books? Before they unwrapped it. Yes.
Yeah, and they like spoke to each of them. I went back and tried to freeze frame to see
Oh,
what book each
yeah.
of them got, and
I
that's
want to know what book Jamie got.
Yeah.
Now, Jamie is the spoiled young, brilliant goal scorer for the team.
Entitled, I would throw in there.
Very, very entitled. Been given everything that he's ever wanted in life, and he takes his book and throws it in the trash.
Well, I could tell you what book Jamie got.
What is it?
Did you freeze frame it?
Yeah.
Oh, do
It's
tell.
F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Beautiful and the Damned.
Oh,
Nice.
my God.
That's perfect. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Wow,
So,
well done, Luke.
Well, and then there were only 3 that I could pack. The other one was for the Nigerian player
which
Sam,
was-
and being out of in a new place, out of his country.
Oh,
He got
yeah.
Ender's Game. Yeah.
Oh, that's really good too.
So it went Ender's Game. I got to admit, I haven't read it all the way through, but I know the gist of the story. It's like somebody a kid being brought to a futuristic military training facility in order to become a great leader.
Yeah, that's the first science fiction book I ever read. And I've only probably read 3 or 4 in my whole life. But yeah,
That's a good one.
it was really impactful. So
Have you read A Wrinkle in Time?
Many, many moons ago.
Oh, my mom gave it to me, and I haven't picked it up yet. But,
Yeah.
but that was the one for the
Yeah.
cantankerous old leader.
Right. But then when he was reading it to his, I think it's niece.
niece.
Yeah.
Niece. I was crying. I was like, oh my gosh, he's reading it to the child. This is beautiful. And then he gets really angry. And she's like, you said a bad word.
Yeah, he gets angry because he's
Because he
realizing
gets it. He
your
has
coach
that
is
aha
saying,
moment. Like, oh, this is why he gave it to me.
it's about me. It's about this young girl
Yeah.
traveling through space and having to have the burdens of leadership thrust upon her.
It's so good.
Okay, so we are jumping all over the map here, and I wanted to I wanted to make some connections, because the reason that I wanted to get everyone on board this podcast is not just to talk about Ted Lasso, which is a show that we love very much, but to also kind of connect it to some of these other works. Now, we haven't quite gotten into that theme that Luke, you've described as your favorite kind of story, which is the optimistic outsider that changes the lives of cynical people in a cynical world. And you and I were communicating over Facebook about this when I first asked you to come on the show, because I came to you with the idea of talking about Ted Lasso, but also connecting it to a world, or connecting it to a work that Deanna just happened to finish reading, called Heidi, the famous children's novel by Joanna Fiery.
Fiery,
Yeah. And I've actually read a couple chapters of it, and I can see the connection because it does have that idea of the optimistic, relentlessly optimistic outsider that conquers the hearts of cynical people. And and you mentioned to me that that was your favorite kind of story, and then you rattled off a list of other works, and then I saw what else you listed, and that made me think, oh my God, those are some of my favorite works. Also, I didn't even realize it was a thing.
Yeah,
Um,
I didn't either until Joel shared it with me. I was like, oh, I've liked that since I was a kid, and I never put them together. They were just always what I gravitated towards.
so let's talk about some of these works now, because, and we will come back to Ted Lasso as well. But some of the works that you mentioned were Anne of Green Gables, The Secret Garden, Pollyanna, and now you mentioned you put Jane Eyre in with a question mark next to it. I think Deanna wants to make the argument that
I argue,
definitely
yeah.
it fits squarely within
I just
that.
reread it with one of my students, and I think it definitely would fit in.
Right. And then you mentioned a couple other movies as well. You talked about Amelie,
Yeah.
Chocolat,
Mhm.
Cold Comfort Farm. Deanna and I saw that a few years ago.
Which is also a book, but I've only seen the movie. I haven't read the book.
Right. And Elf is also on our list too, because
Yeah.
when you mentioned your list, we started talking about it. Oh, this fits and that fits. And so it's amazing to think that there are that many out there. So for the people in listener land, to if you haven't experienced these works and you like what we're talking about, they're definitely worth looking at. But let's talk about what draws you to that kind of story, Luke.
Oh man. Okay. Um, well, for me personally, I teach, and as maybe a lot of your audience knows, I spoke to you before, Joel, about teaching literature, and one of the things that we talked about previously is how we try to really make these characters and these stories personally meaningful to the students. And so I enter into a classroom, enter into a group, hoping to spark some wonderful positive meaning in them. And so in a way, it's I empathize with those characters, and sometimes I don't succeed and sometimes I do, but I want the vision of somebody stepping into a group and helping others grow and develop and be happy. So whenever somebody asks me, Luke, what do you describe as the purpose of teaching literature? Or teaching art appreciation, it's to fall in love with literature, to love literature. I want them coming away not having read a list of books or getting all this cultural knowledge or developing thinking skills. I want them to love art, love literature. And so that kind of brimming positivity is something that I want to see in stories. And that's one reason why I particularly bonded with Ted Lasso. And I think that's also why I like seeing the other stories like Anne of Green Gables or Amelie, which I adore and I saw recently. And you've got people around you, and boy, I spent more time on Twitter than maybe I should be, but there's so much cynicism in the world, and there's so much of a response to other people as you're reacting against them. And sometimes I feel like this kind of story makes me feel like the world is a wonderful place, and I want to get to know people, and I want to bond with others, and I think that things can change.
Well, it's clear that there's the personal connection that you have with this kind of a story too. I mean, these characters are doing those things in their world as well, right? So they're not necessarily actively trying to teach, but one thing that they all have in common is this connection to something that is good, or the best, in a focus on what is good in the people around them, what they can or what is possible for them to accomplish, rather than necessarily what they are in that moment. They see the best in them or the best potential in them.
I love that description, and I'm having images of Amelie surreptitiously,
Yeah.
getting that little box of childhood toys to the right owner after so many years, or of Mary in The Secret Garden, when she is going to get the young Craven boy out of his wheelchair and out into the garden. Yeah,
it's just an absolute delight to read this. I have taken in the last month or so to reading children's literature. The world is just too chaos. And so right now I'm reading Alice in Wonderland, which doesn't fit this model at all. But I read Heidi, and I'm going to reread Anne next. And so but there's something about these stories that give you hope that there are enough people that have this, I call this sort of innate goodness, or this internal morality that drives good and finds good in other people. I have to believe that there are enough people like that still in the world, for Ted Lasso to be made, and for people to still believe. It seems like this kind of almost childhood innocence, and I think that we get that beat out of us. A lot of people do, but people call me Pollyanna all the time, because I'm just that person. I look around, I'm like, oh, look at that, the sky is beautiful today. That's just my personality. And so I love these works for that, because it makes me, one, even as a kid, not feel so weird, and two, I think that the world is an amazing place, and there is goodness, and you just have to find it.
I do think that these characters do have that focus on good, that as the thing that drives them, as something that's inextricable to who they are. And I do I want to add that I saw an interview with Jason Sudeikis in preparation for this conversation we're having right now. I searched around for some of the press interviews, and when you do a search for one thing on YouTube, everything that follows will be other examples of that. But Jason Sudeikis said that Ted Lasso is like the best version of himself. He wanted to write it as the best person of who he could be, which is
I can see that.
Yeah, and
it comes through.
It really does. It's something that it doesn't always. One of the reasons I think that we don't see a lot of that is that you have to be more imaginative to be able to come up with legitimate and compelling conflicts in drama in order to continue the story. So if you, by the way, Luke, have you ever seen a movie called Being There with Peter Sellers?
I have not.
Yeah, that's another one that might fit into this category. And one of the things that we see with this particular kind of story idea is the commonality of like a childlike innocence. And then the conflict comes against the child running up against the world, and that ends up being played over and over again. But so now my question is, and I think this is disproven by Ted Lasso, because while he does have some aspects of childlike innocence, he's not a child. He's white and adult. And
he knows the world.
Yeah.
He's fully aware of what others' motives are, and he's fully aware of when people are what is it? What's that? I'm not. It's a British slang, naughty word.
Yeah.
Begins with W.
With a W, and yeah. And it's repeated over and over and over again. And that's the one time where he's not doesn't have a clue of what's going on. He knows
Right.
it's something bad that everybody's saying to him, but he's fully aware of how people receive him. This is not like Elf or not like Anne of Green Gables, where they're pretty innocent.
Yeah.
In fact, I think he's very used to dealing with things like this, because okay, so there's that point. I want to go back to something else that you mentioned a little bit earlier before, which I find really interesting, that Jason Sudeikis wrote this as being the best version of himself. And so what you have here is not a biography of a coach that's out there. I don't know of any coach that's like this. And I follow sports pretty like all the time. I've got my soccer teams, my football teams.
If anyone out there is like Ted Lasso, it might be Pete Carroll from the
maybe. Yeah.
If
and
anyone could be, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great connection. And maybe for those soccer fans out there, maybe like Jurgen Klopp and for Liverpool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
But he's kind of created this ideal, and that when every moment that we see him, he is Ted Lasso, and so okay, I've got two different directions I want to go in here.
Okay.
One is I'll go back to kind of you have this version of Ted Lasso, this version of a leader that is this idealized version, and so you can think about everything that Ted Lasso does, or how Ted Lasso might approach things in your own life, and think to yourself, okay, what is that, the Ted Lasso way, and see how you would approach it for yourself. And actually, I was doing this recently when I was teaching my first class of the year, and I was made a list of the things that I was consciously thinking about if I were to channel Ted Lasso. I'm going to make sure to remember everybody's name. I brought candy for everybody.
Yeah,
Really tough. That is so hard.
Yeah, but just putting the effort, or making sure to catch glimpses of the person, what's personal glimpses of each person that I'm interacting with. So just having that ideal vision of the kind of leader that I want to be, I can use that to channel and to try to apply those ideas. Now, the second direction I'm going is this, having a realistic version of Ted Lasso. I think there are kind of realistic versions they're not necessarily in the coaching realm. The first one that comes to mind is Mr. Rogers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good one. That's a really good connection you made there.
Yeah.
It's all goodness, and it's all lead by example.
Goodness, lead by example, and the focus of the caring on the individual and maximizing each individual's what they can achieve for themselves.
Absolutely. And it's bringing out that good. It's that inspiration of wanting to help people be the best versions of themselves. And when he's talking to Trent Grime, a reporter, he says for a second time, I don't care about wins and losses, which in soccer is unheard of.
Completely unheard of. And that's something that I grind against, because I play soccer and I want to win, but I buy it. I buy it, and that's something to really care about. So can I connecting a little bit to my teaching? Please. I'm not a big fan of grades. And I'll give evaluations and I'll give grades if they're asked for, but I look to motivate students by a different means. And I think the natural consequence of them going to be their best selves leads to the victories in the game or to success in their life. So there's so much that I buy about Ted Lasso that is also connected to these real life heroes, whether it's Mr. Rogers, or there's another one, Marshall Rosenberg, whom I love, who taught nonviolent communication. Or he wrote a book called Nonviolent Communication. It's all about listening carefully to what somebody else is saying, and also honoring what is going on within you. And so he seems to be kind of an amalgam of all these different kinds of leaders that you don't really get in a sports movie. I mean, there are lots of great coach sports movies. Like one of my favorites is Moneyball. But Moneyball is all about not caring about the players and caring
Right.
only about the numbers in order to achieve success.
But even movies like that I love, like Rudy is a sports movie, and it is really inspiring, but it is quite different. It's a different challenge. It's a different type of thing that's almost like a Cinderella story in the sports world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this might have more in common with Dead Poet Society in terms of leadership style.
Yeah.
That's a
Right.
great movie connection. Yep.
Yeah. But this sort of relentless optimism has just going back to the earlier point is something that is typically embodied by a child because of perhaps the cynical age that we live in, that no one who is not a child can possibly see the world this way. And yet we have examples like Mr. Rogers, who believed in what was possible here.
Oh, but that movie that came out recently, the Mr. Rogers movie.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, I didn't see it either.
Okay. All right.
Is it worthwhile?
It's worth it, but if you're looking for the theme of positivity, bringing light to the world,
Not there.
I got a little bit different message from the movie, and I think that's maybe a little bit of a controversial take, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. So
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks for the warning.
No, it's not a warning because I know others who've really, really enjoyed it. But
Okay, yeah, I'm sitting here at my desk, right? And I have Mr. Rogers mints right here. And I have my Mr. Rogers Funko Pop. So I am a huge fan.
And so that's the thing, though, because, and this is the point that I wanted to bring up as a larger issue, is that if this is such a strong dramatic lesson that we can explore through fiction, through literature, through movies and TV, we probably don't see it very often because of this this belief that the only way it could be embodied realistically is if you are a child and you haven't lost your innocence yet, or you could have some kind of mental issue development that keeps you from understanding that the world is really not that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that,
it's
I mean,
almost
that's
like having, like, people think it's almost like a superpower. Like you have to have some sort of special other thing to be optimistic or be that kind of a person.
Or some deficiency.
Right.
Because
you're not involved in the way the world is.
Right.
Exactly.
That's not how the world really works.
Unrealistic approach to reality.
Which is one of the things that makes this show so revolutionary. Because it can approach it.
Joel, that's huge.
Right? Because
say that again, you're seeing the show as revolutionary.
Well,
all right. You got my attention.
And so I say that because relentless optimism is a revolutionary act. Because it runs so counter to the culture as we have it at present, but to also be able to portray that image from an adult perspective, that's the revolutionary part, right? That you could be a fully functioning human being with no deficiencies and still see the world this way. That is the part that is revolutionary.
Yeah, this is not an 11-year-old girl or a 30-year-old elf from the North Pole.
Or an 8-year-old girl. I mean, and the reason why, if we can go back to Jane Eyre, I argue Jane Eyre is this optimist. There are dark parts of the story, but she is certain that things like she, again, spoiler, but when she leaves because she has this certainty in her, and she knows that there's a better life out there for her than compromising herself. And even when she, things are she gets the inheritance and things are, going well, she wants to bring joy to others, and therefore she shares it with her cousins. And so there's this even as a child, when all the horrible things that she's going through, she takes it. And I think that she always, and maybe this is just my projection, but I always thought that she knew that there would be something better and that the world can't be this dark.
She did go through a lot of dark stuff, didn't she?
Yeah, she goes through a lot of dark. But, it's a Bronte novel. Of course, it's going to be dark.
So what about Heidi? How close is Heidi to
Heidi is amazing. I mean, I want you to read it so badly. I want to have a conversation with you another time, Luke. But I read it when I was young, and I haven't read it in 40 years, probably. Giving you my age now. But so she's so sweet. And she's this orphan, and so this orphan thing always tends to come up in these stories, not necessarily in Ted Lasso, but in the literature. It seems like there's a lot of this orphan thing going on, right? You got Mary Lennox and Anne of Green Gables.
That, by the way, that is actually, it makes sense dramatically, because the Optimist is an outsider who comes into an existing cynical world. Dramatically, that makes a lot of sense, because that's where the conflicts are going to come from.
Right.
Well, Ted Lasso is also an outsider, and
absolutely, and he is, in a way, he's orphaned. Yeah. So Heidi, she gets dropped off at her grandfather's, and his name is Uncle Arp, and he has this tragic sort of backstory, and he's this old curmudgeon that lives up in the mountains and doesn't go down to the town. And she wins him over in like a minute. It is so wonderful. And then she gets taken away from him, and he's just distraught. And she goes to Frankfurt and lives with this family and charms everyone except for our villain, right? There's always one. But there's this daughter she's brought along to be a playmate for this young girl, and she has she's very sickly, and she's in a wheelchair, and she can't walk, and she's just kind of just, it's so interesting. Like, they always have the windows shut, so she doesn't get any sunshine, she doesn't get any exercise, and then
sounds like Secret Garden.
Yeah, I think the Secret Garden.
Yeah, it's very Secret Garden-y.
But I think Heidi predates Secret Garden, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'd have to check my dates on that. But she's just this wonderful little girl, and all she wants, even the whole time she's in Frankfurt, Heidi herself, she like stops eating. She's very sad because she just wants to be in the mountains and run around with the goats and live with Uncle Arp and Peter the goat herder, who's this, kind of a cantankerous little boy who doesn't want to learn, and she teaches him to read. Like, she's just perfect. I love her so much. So but definitely that outsider, and I don't know, you've seen kind of those movies or something where somebody waves a brush and all of a sudden it's in color and sparkles. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's this kind of fantasy thing. Maybe it's cartoons where they'll just go like this, and then everything is perfect and colorful and sparkly. Well, I think that's what these characters do for the world, is that they make the world a better place, and a nicer place. And by the time Heidi is over, like, I was bawling as an adult. I don't remember crying as a child when I read this, but as an adult, I was crying. So it was just really remarkable.
Yeah, and I want to just add to that, from the 4 or so chapters that I've read of Heidi, that the way that she does this has a lot in common with all the other stories, including Ted Lasso that we've been talking about, is that she focuses on what the best is in a person. So she doesn't focus on her grandfather's cantankerousness. She focuses on what he can do. There's another character, the grandmother of Peter the goat herd, who's blind, but she focuses on the good that's in her, even though she can't see, her other senses are working well, and she can hear, and she loves listening to Heidi talk. So Heidi focuses on that. So this idea of the optimist character focusing on what is good is something that is a contrast to what we might normally do in life, which is to focus on, well, not necessarily the bad things, but we have all kinds of things that we look at, and it's very rewarding to see someone who has the ability to focus on good.
Yeah, the good in each person. So you're kind of making me think of Nate the Great,
Yeah,
the kit manager, the kit
right.
man.
And
Yeah.
groundskeeper, and
Yeah,
gopher.
and then Ted says, "You got an idea, really, of how to run the offense?" And he runs with it, and it works. And that kind of encouragement of somebody who doesn't believe in themselves is something that, yeah, you're right. It seems to repeat itself in all these stories.
And a
Even
coach character is a perfect embodiment of that, because that's the kind of character that is tasked with getting the best out of people. But what's really interesting about that, I mean, just in terms of the profession of coaching, and we see this all over sports, because, Luke, you've seen this all over the place. There are coaches and managers, even general managers and technical directors who focus on what their players can't do. They have a deficiency. They can't defend. They can't, they can't pass. They're not tall enough, or whatever. Instead of focusing on what they can do, and when you see coaches, Jurgen Klopp is famous for being able to focus on a player's best attributes, then it changes not only what you can get from them, but also their demeanor and the environment surrounding the team as a whole. It just changes the whole dynamic when you see that kind of a positive approach.
Yeah, and as we're talking about coaches right now, it's one thing that's occurring to me is most of the coach movies, in the past years have been about this coach that tells you got to grind out for all those inches out there. You got to look for them, and you got to push. You got to push hard, or you've got to have pride, and we got to go out there and do it for the team. And so it's this rah and build yourself up. And
it's about willpower in that sense, as opposed to a more like a positive way of looking at what attributes you possess, what's good about what you can do.
Absolutely. And I think I'm a generation too late, because that's the generation that I come from. And as I think more about the kinds of stories that I hear about coaches now, there's less of that. And those more ardent, rah willpower coaches, they're fewer and fewer. I just heard a quick anecdote like a couple days ago about the coach for the Houston Rockets, Mike D'Antoni,
Mm-hmm.
who never toils any of his players. That's a bad shot. Coach of a basketball coach never tells any of his players, don't take that shot, or why did you take that shot?
Mm-hmm.
Because he wants them to feel free to be themselves on the court. And that's kind of shocking to me. And because you don't take a 3-point shot when you have 20 seconds left in the shot clock. But that approach, I think, is something like you talked about Pete Carroll, and there's Jurgen Klopp, and I think there are more and more coaches like that out there. They are there, and that Ted Lasso is an embodiment of a different kind of approach to coaching that I think is part of some very positive things in leadership that are happening.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? That, I mean, we can see that happening in a dramatic story like this, and really respond to it. But I think that that it's just that this is something that it's like a dessert. It's just like such a treat to be able to see it in action. But I stand by my my evaluation of it as being revolutionary, because for us to be able to see this as an adult kind of judgment, adult behavior, means that it's not fantasy. It's not something that can only exist in a
Amen.
fantastical world, like Elf, for example. You know, a movie that Deanna absolutely loves,
I do so much.
and I am less ardent about it, let's say. But I mean, I see what's beautiful about it, but it is also fantasy. So, so to have
It's not
something
real.
okay, but to have something that is grounded yet still has these same qualities is a lesson for, you know, for us and for Hollywood, for people who want to create these things.
And it's very aware of the fact that it could easily be interpreted as fantastical, because it's got this absurd premise of a coach from a different sport who with a goofiness to him, who comes and says he's going to coach these players from that don't buy, nobody buys into him at all. And it's not just the characters that don't buy into him. The show is very aware that you as the audience isn't going to buy not just into him, but into the whole premise of this show. And you're going to think this is just absurd. And what's so powerfully convincing about the show is at the end of those first 3 episodes that were laid out, I was thinking to myself, this is not a cartoon. This is not a fantasy. This is not Mighty Ducks. This is not Angels in the Outfield. This is something real that I'm convinced by the fact that he can be a coach for a soccer team, even though he's a football coach, because what he's doing is really works and is efficacious. And I get why he's doing it. And he lays out exactly why he's doing it when he talks to the reporter. He asks the reporter, what do you love to do, Trent? And you love to write, right? And, well, I love to coach, he says. And I'm here to coach. And I'm here to coach, to help these young men be the best version of themselves possible. And so, boy, it's so refreshing.
As teachers here, I mean, we've got 2 teachers on the line.
Exactly. I mean, that's what you do when you stand up there. You want to empower your students to, you know, not only understand the material or whatever, but to get something out of it, to be better, to understand the world better, to understand humanity better. I mean, that's why you teach literature and art, which both of us do. It's, you know, we're not teaching chemistry so you can understand how, you know, elements work and things like that. We are teaching the human condition.
Yeah. I want to, Joel, I want to ask you a question about the revolutionariness of this.
Sure.
Would you say that it sounds like you're saying this is really revolutionary because you would usually find this kind of character with this heroic optimism in a fantasy story or in a children's story, or I remember there's this French movie of I forgot what it's called, but an adult who's got some mental deficiencies.
Are you
and
talking about the Monsieur Hulot movies?
I think so.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Charlie Chaplin-esque kind of thing where he goes through life with this, you know, expecting things are going to work out for him, but it's very kind of physical comedy.
You might be thinking of something something different, but the general idea is you're seeing this as revolutionary because this is a functioning adult,
Efficacious
in the world,
adult. Yep.
Who's taking on the most cynical parts of the world, the British tabloids, and among other things there. But that's something we haven't seen anywhere else. Maybe the closest thing we've seen it is like in Dead Poet Society, or maybe in Chocolat, but that's a little bit of a fantasy too. Or maybe in Amélie, though that's a little bit more of a personal story.
Amélie is, I think, fits into the magical realism kind of genre, or at least the style. So, I mean, these are all things that almost have to apologize for their optimism by placing them in a world that is not ours,
Oh, I love that formulation.
right?
This is not only not apologizing for it, it's like let's get the most cynical stuff out front.
Yeah, let's do
Come
this.
on and challenge this.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And for that, it deserves recognition. I don't know if anyone would really see it that way, or at least would consciously articulate it that way. But I mean, I'm certainly aware of how not mainstream this is.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's certain other parts of this kind of a story that the demand for an innocence or a childlikeness to the main character is because of the belief in the power of cynicism, right? So that's what I mean when I say that it almost has to apologize by placing it outside of a realistic and grounded world. But there are other attributes as well, like the fish out of water kind of style
Mm-hmm.
that the character has to be, and because you're taking a character with a profoundly sort of irrepressible set of values, and then putting them into a situation that is not that way, decidedly. So it has to be there has to be aspects of comedy of manners, of being in a world that you don't quite understand. But even in that case, I mean, even under those circumstances, we see that he is not an imbecile. I mean, he is not. He is able to negotiate these waters and be able to figure out how he needs to maneuver. So he's not, and that's the thing about the earlier version of the character for the NBC commercials. That character was an imbecile because you could get the laugh that way in a 2-minute spot. But you can't grow and you can't sustain 10 episodes unless you have a character. Like if that guy showed up in this movie or in this TV series, you would hate him by the end of 5 minutes. So
well, it would be
it
would be different. It would be a slapstick, and it would be, it's a totally different show. But the fact that there was that pivot to,
and it's
not
clear
just
that,
mock him.
Yeah, it's clear that the writers, specifically Jason Sudeikis, who's writing most of this material, knew that you would come in with the expectations of seeing that or knowing that character, and then to twist that and play around with it and to subvert your expectations
and
for great value.
So to follow up on that, you do have a lot of the fish out of water comedy, and sometimes it can really come across as kind of slapsticky. And I think it's deliberately meant to come across as slapsticky for the other characters who are like, he talks about, oh, well, I thought I saw Big Ben, but that was just, it was a pretty tiny clock, and that wasn't the one I was. And so other characters like, who is this doofus? Or he says something like, well, I don't know what your smallest unit of measurement is around here, but that's the amount of headway I made with the team today. And so, because he's a fish out of water, it's the cultural juxtaposition is played up for laughs, and he does come across as a doofus to others. But okay, I think that he is aware of it himself.
Oh, he's absolutely aware. The show emphatically makes that clear.
Yeah, and like when he drinks the tea, for instance.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a scene where he had that interaction with his star player after he put the gum in the donation box, confronted him, walked away. The character behind his back made an obscene gesture, but he saw it in the mirror.
Or he saw the reflection in
Yeah.
the mirror.
But he chose to walk away and choose his battle.
That's a great indication of how he's aware.
Yeah.
And I'll give you another one, which I've been trying to like think of. Okay, what are some of my favorite scenes? And maybe this one is it's kind of it's odd to be a favorite, but I think it fits right in with like a master plan of his, understanding that his kind of goofiness adds a little bit of levity and makes him more approachable to others. When he's in the boss's office and he's like giving his little spiel about, I want to make a team with you guys, we've got to have some team bonding, even Higgins, the lackey, and I are going to have lunch. And as he's walking out, Higgins spills into a pun, and Higgins says, "Caesar you later." and Ted Lasso, he's out of the room and then suddenly bursts back in, frightens the boss, and he points out, he says, "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." And he walks back out.
Yeah, it's not about the joke. It's about the bonding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, again, these are adult choices. This is not something that you do as a way to express bonding with optimists on a childlike level.
And even with Amélie, who does it surreptitiously.
Mm-hmm.
This is out in the open, facing the world, going in front of the British tabloid press and speaking to them. And I don't know the offside rule, except I know it when I see it, just like that court case on pornography.
Right. Exactly. By the way, some of those jokes, and this is in the pilot, right? If you were someone who watched those commercials, and every time premiere season rolls around, you go on YouTube and you see that commercial pop up again, and those jokes, right? Because those jokes were used in the earlier character. Those jokes were reused in the pilot, but twisted in a way, right? Because you knew if you saw them coming, like the joke about playing all four halves, or all four quarters.
Yep.
No, they're two quarters. Win, lose, or tie, or we'll play 100% win or lose.
How many countries are here? How many countries are in this country?
Yeah.
What's interesting about these jokes is that there's an added twist that makes the character more adult or more able, rather than somebody who's just an imbecile. And you can use those jokes in a setting where the guy had just taken a transatlantic flight without sleeping, and you can use that joke now as a way to reveal the character of somebody who has who is not at his top mental state, which allows you to use the joke and still keep his stature as a true adult.
Yeah, just like being the fish out of water, or the Kansas guy in London.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're not reducing his character by introducing those jokes. They're funny.
And it'll just come across as reducing his character to others because of it.
Right.
But,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's excellent writing.
Oh man.
It's not just revolutionary, right? It's also
What
very
it's
good
not
written.
just revolutionary.
Yeah, it's not just right.
Well, I'm really glad, Joel, that you made such a big declaration, because I'm all in. I don't know where this is going to go. I think one thing I really like about it is it's really setting up some big conflicts down the road, and I can't wait to see what those conflicts will look like. And maybe he might turn out to have to, I don't know, where maybe the optimism will go away, or something will happen. I don't know. I hope not.
Absolute betrayal of everything we've seen so far. So we'll have to revisit this after the season finale. But good news, Apple TV has announced that there will be a season 2.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
I'm breaking the news to you.
Joel, that's great, because I was already thinking prior to coming on, like, okay, what am I going to do to try to advocate for this show as much as possible?
Yeah.
Jason Sudeikis liked my tweet about the show, and Bill Lawrence, he
awesome.
replied back to me on Twitter in one of these tweets that I send out. So
You're gonna have to.
I feel like I got a personal connection with the creators now.
Yeah,
so
you're gonna have to tweet out the link to this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely will.
Yeah, well, I think we at least have the title for our podcast, something to do with relentless optimism as a revolutionary act. But we will definitely revisit this as the episodes go on, and I think we need to have you on for the season finale.
I'd be happy to come on.
Okay.
Yeah. If you get a chance, read Heidi between now and then. I will have
it
reread a
falls
couple
into the
others
genre,
myself.
the subgenre of literature
Yes.
that I love. So
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. It's so good. I think you'll really like it.
Well, thanks again, Luke, and we will talk to you soon.
thank you, Joel. Thank you, Deanna.
Bye.
Thanks to Luke and Deanna for appearing on the show. You can find Luke at his website, literatureatourhouse.com, or check the show notes for the link. You can find more of Deanna's work on the Passionate Homeschooler YouTube channel. If you're liking what you're hearing from us on the Passionate Homeschooler podcast, make sure you subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening to this episode on your desktop, we can also be found on the iTunes podcast app along with other popular mobile podcast players. Also, consider giving us a 5-star rating and a review on your podcast platform. It really helps other people find the show and helps us grow as well. If you have any ideas or feedback you'd like to share with us, send an email to info@passionatehomeschooler.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.